You answer the phone, and before the other person even speaks, your body tenses.
Yeah, that immediate physical reaction.
Right. They just need to vent, they say. They just need a little help. And even though you are completely exhausted, even though a part of you is just screaming to hang up, you automatically say, of course, I can handle it.
It's just a reflex at that point.
Exactly. You step right into the role of the fixer,
Yeah.
the listener, the responsible one. Because, I mean, if you don't hold it all together, who will?
And it is such a heavy feeling, isn't it? That automatic tightening in your chest before you even realize you've already agreed to take on someone else's burden.
It really is. It's this overwhelming, almost like gravitational pull to just manage the emotional weight of everyone around you. And, often at the complete expense of your own needs.
But the thing to understand is that pull, it's rarely a conscious choice. It's actually a deeply ingrained pattern, a kind of psychological architecture that was built to survive a very specific kind of environment.
So it's not just a personality quirk like being a people pleaser or something.
Not at all. When you feel that reflex to just immediately absorb someone else's stress, you are likely experiencing the echo of an environment where you had to do exactly that just to keep your world from falling apart.
Wow.
Yeah, it almost always begins long before we have the vocabulary to even describe it, long before our shoulders are, broad enough to actually carry that kind of load.
That brings up a really specific image for me
Yeah.
because in the clinical psychology literature, there's actually a term for this lived experience, this feeling
Yeah.
of constant crushing responsibility.
Yes, the Atlas personality.
Right, the Atlas personality. And honestly, what a perfect metaphor. I mean, Atlas was the Titan from Greek mythology who angered Zeus and was condemned to hold up the sky for all eternity.
It's incredibly fitting.
When I read that, it just hit me. Like, that is exactly what this feels like. You are standing there, muscles trembling, just terrified that if you shift your weight even a little bit, the sky is going to collapse on everyone you love.
It is an incredibly apt but also incredibly painful metaphor. Because the Atlas personality, it describes someone who was obliged, very early in their childhood, to take on adult responsibilities way prematurely.
Like, before they were ready.
Exactly. We are talking about a child who felt compelled to provide actual psychological support to their parents, often to navigate a really chaotic or unpredictable family situation.
So they become like the anchor in a storm they didn't even create.
Right. And the result of that early forced maturation is this fundamental rewiring. They become highly liable to develop a pattern of compulsive caregiving later in life.
Compulsive caregiving.
Yes. They don't just, prefer to help. Their nervous system literally demands that they take care of everyone else in order to feel safe.
I really want to look closer at what it actually feels like to be this person. Because I think there is a massive disconnect between the outside view and the internal reality.
Oh, a huge disconnect.
Right. From the outside, the Atlas personality looks like a massive success story.
Right.
I mean, these are the people you want on your team. They're the high achievers, the ultimate problem solvers. They seem to function, exceptionally well under pressure.
They look like they have it all together.
Exactly. But when you look at what the psychological research says about their internal state, it's pretty bleak. Internally, a person with an Atlas personality often feels, completely devoid of fun.
Yes, that's very common.
They describe this pervasive sense of emptiness, a distinct lack of vitality. And, I mean, how does someone who is so outwardly successful feel so incredibly empty?
Well, because they are holding up the sky, but they aren't actually allowed to enjoy the view. The weight isn't literal, obviously. It's entirely emotional.
Right.
Imagine you're a child, and your primary job in the family is to make sure your mother doesn't fall into a deep depression, or, to make sure your parents' arguments don't turn violent.
That's terrifying for a kid.
It is. And you learn a very dangerous lesson in that environment. You learn that your fundamental value lies entirely in your utility.
Wow. Love equals utility.
Exactly. You are loved, or at least you are kept safe, strictly because you are useful to the adults.
That is such a heavy equation to internalize at that age.
It completely warps your sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
So as adults, underneath that really highly competent, shiny exterior, there is often this underlying depression, severe anxiety, and a complete inability to assert their own needs.
Which is why would they?
Right. Why would they? In their foundational years, Having needs of their own was literally dangerous. A child with needs is a burden to a fragile system. It threatened the delicate balance of the family.
So they just learn to amputate their own desires.
That's a great way to put it. They amputate them.
And there's something else that happens when you amputate your own needs like that, isn't there? Like a deeply buried anger.
Yes, a hidden rage.
Right? A hidden rage against the parents. Not just for, failing to provide unconditional love, but for actively exploiting the child for their own emotional regulation.
Because it's a profound betrayal of the natural order of things. I mean, a child's true self, their spontaneity, their playfulness, their right to just be a kid, it was all sacrificed to manage the parents' instability.
So the rage makes perfect sense.
It makes complete sense. But here's the tragic part. Because the Atlas personality is so intensely focused on caregiving and keeping the peace, they can't express that rage outward.
Because that would cause conflict.
Exactly, which is exactly what they are wired to prevent.
Yeah.
So that rage turns inward. It metastasizes into that depression and that profound sense of emptiness you mentioned earlier.
It makes me think of a very specific feeling. It's like being handed the steering wheel while you're still strapped into a car seat in the back.
Ah, that's a brilliant analogy.
Right. You are suddenly driving the entire family, but you don't even know how to reach the pedals. You can barely see over the dashboard.
Oh.
You just have to figure it out, because if you don't, the car is going to crash and everyone is going to get hurt.
And you never get to stop driving.
Yeah, you never get to stop.
The vigilance required to drive from a car seat, it never really turns off. The Atlas personality becomes hypersensitive to the moods of others. They walk into a room and their brain immediately runs like a threat assessment scan.
Checking the emotional weather.
Yes. Is someone's jaw tight? Did someone's tone of voice just drop? Is conflict brewing? They are constantly monitoring the room to prevent disaster because their nervous system still genuinely believes that a shift in someone else's mood could mean an existential threat to their safety.
If you value conversations like this, you can stay with us here.
We really want to unpack this.
Yeah, because we are going to put a name to this entire dynamic. This feeling of being the driver in the car seat, the Atlas holding up the sky. The mission of this deep dive is to explore the origins of this overwhelming sense of responsibility.
And how it shapes our internal world.
Exactly. And to do this, we are looking at a really fascinating stack of sources. We've got clinical psychology, family systems theory, the latest research on interpersonal communication. Because for a long time, people just thought this was a personality quirk.
They'd say, oh, they're just an old soul.
Right. They're just so mature for their age, but it isn't a quirk. The clinical term for this, which defines everything we are exploring today, is parentification.
And defining the pattern is often the very first step in dismantling its power over you. Parentification, at its core, is a functional role reversal.
Okay, break that down for us.
It's a dynamic where the child is forced to sacrifice their own developmental needs. So their need for attention, for comfort, for guidance, for play.
All the normal kid stuff.
Right. They sacrifice that in order to accommodate and care for the logistical and emotional needs of the parent. The child basically becomes the parent, and the parent becomes the child.
So that's what this is called, parentification. It's not just, being a good helper. And looking at the sources, what's fascinating is that psychologists have actually identified two completely different ways a child ends up holding the sky.
Yes. Two main types, and the distinction between them is crucial.
The first one is instrumental parentification.
Right. Instrumental parentification is the logistical heavy lifting. It's the tangible, visible stuff.
Right, so this is the child cooking dinner every single night. This is the 10-year-old doing all the laundry, cleaning the house, maybe even, managing the family finances.
Or literally raising their younger siblings.
Yeah.
Especially while the parents are either absent, working constantly, or somehow incapacitated.
It is a massive burden.
Yeah.
But as you said, it's visible. I mean, people can see a 10-year-old making dinner and recognize that something is off.
Exactly. But the second type, emotional parentification, is often entirely invisible to the outside world. And psychologically, it is usually much more destructive.
Let's dig into that. What does emotional parentification actually look like behind closed doors?
This is when the child becomes the emotional support system for the parent. The child becomes the therapist or the confidant.
Like a mother crying to her young son about her marriage.
Yes, or her financial terrors. Sharing adult fears that a child's brain literally cannot process yet. Or the child becomes the mediator, constantly stepping in to de-escalate explosive conflicts between their parents.
So they're tasked with regulating the distressed adult.
Exactly.
Like what happens when a parent treats a child as a substitute for an absent partner? There's a term for that, too, in the literature, right? Specification.
Yes, spouseification is a severe form of emotional parentification. You see this often after a really messy divorce, or if one parent is just emotionally unavailable.
The other parent leans on the kid.
They essentially elevate the child to the status of a surrogate spouse. They don't necessarily cross physical boundaries, but they completely violate the emotional boundaries.
So.
Well, in a healthy family, the parent and child have an asymmetrical relationship. The parent is the authority, the provider of care, the shield. When it becomes symmetrical, like a partnership or a marriage dynamic, the child's psychological safety is completely destroyed. The hierarchy collapses.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on this a little bit. Because as we are talking, I can imagine someone listening and thinking, isn't doing chores just a normal part of growing up? Like, I did the dishes, I watched my little sister. Does that mean I was parentified?
It's a very common question.
Right, because isn't it good to teach kids responsibility? Where exactly is the line between a kid just, helping out and full-blown instrumental parentification?
It's a vital distinction, and it's where a lot of confusion lies. Chores and responsibilities are absolutely healthy. They build competence and a sense of contribution.
So when does it cross the line?
It crosses the line into parentification when three specific things happen. First, it causes a fundamental breakdown in familial boundaries. You aren't just helping out, you are in charge.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, the demands far exceed the child's age and maturity level. We aren't talking about a teenager doing their own laundry. We are talking about an 8-year-old managing the household budget or a 12-year-old routinely skipping school to care for toddlers.
So it's really about scale and appropriateness.
Exactly. And the third and most critical factor, it crosses the line when the child must consistently suppress their own developmental needs in order to maintain familial stability.
Wow.
The child cannot go to their friend's house, cannot join a sports team, cannot even afford to get sick, because if they do, the family system collapses. The child is no longer helping. They are sustaining the family's survival.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's the difference between contributing to the ship and being the only thing keeping the ship from sinking. And this makes me think of something else from the sources. The concept of limiting by Cloud and Townsend. In a healthy environment, a child is allowed to just be a kid. They are allowed to push boundaries, to make mistakes, and to rely on the adults to keep things safe.
They have limits, but they have safety within those limits.
Right. But when a child is parentified, they experience a profound lack of safety. And the response to that void, to that terrifying realization that the adults are not in control, is a desperate need to control their environment.
Because when the adults are out of control, the child over-controls to compensate. They have to. If the environment is chaotic, the only way to survive is to become an obsessive manager of that environment.
Which brings us right to the door of the behavioral science. How does this actually rewire a human being?
If we want to understand the mechanics of this, we really have to look at family systems theory, especially the work of Minuchin and Bowen. In a healthy system, there is a clear hierarchy. The parents form a united front at the top, shielding the children below.
And parentification inverts that hierarchy.
Okay.
One of the most fascinating mechanisms of that inversion in the research is something called emotional triangulation. This happens all the time.
It really does.
Imagine two parents who are in constant conflict. They can't resolve their issues, and the tension between them gets incredibly high. It's uncomfortable. So to stabilize that tension, they pull in the third point. They pull in the child.
The child is triangulated.
Suddenly, the child is forced to mediate the argument or choose sides or act as a messenger between two adults living in the same house.
It's a classic stabilization technique for a dysfunctional system. I always think of it like a stool. A two-legged stool will fall over, but a three-legged stool can stand, even if it's wobbly.
But it is incredibly damaging to that third leg, the child.
Unbelievably damaging. And this ties directly into what Bowen called the family projection process. Parents who are struggling with their own unresolved anxiety, their own trauma, or profound loneliness will unknowingly project those intense emotional issues onto their child.
So the parentified child literally becomes the sponge.
Yes, the sponge that absorbs the parent's unfulfilled emotional needs.
And if we look at attachment theory, Bowlby's work, which is really the bedrock of how we understand human relationships, the damage becomes even more clear. Parentification completely disrupts secure attachment.
Because when a child is young, they are biologically wired to attach to a caregiver for survival.
Right. But what happens when the caregiver demands that the child attach to them as the provider of care? the child develops a behavior called compulsive caregiving.
Yes, if a parent is emotionally unavailable, erratic, or fragile, the child realizes something terrifying. My source of survival is unreliable.
That's a scary thought for a kid.
So their brilliant, adaptable brain creates a strategy. They think the only way I can keep this parent close to me, the only way I can ensure they don't abandon me or fall apart completely, is if I make myself absolutely indispensable to them.
I have to be too useful to lose.
Exactly. I will anticipate their every need. I will care for them so perfectly that they cannot survive without me.
It's a survival strategy. It maintains proximity to the parent, but at a terrible, terrible cost to the child's development.
And that cost becomes glaringly obvious in adulthood. Compulsive caregiving in childhood very frequently manifests as anxious or disorganized attachment styles in adult relationships.
Because they're still running that old program.
The adult deeply fears abandonment because abandonment was always a looming threat in childhood, and they try to prevent that abandonment by overfunctioning in every single relationship they have.
They become the hyper-competent partner, or the friend who always listens but never shares.
All driven by a hidden terror of being left behind.
Let's talk about what happens to the person underneath all that competence. There's a concept from psychodynamic theory, specifically Winnicott's work, that is just heartbreakingly relevant here. The idea of the true self versus the false self.
It's a foundational concept for understanding this.
When a child is forced prematurely to take excessive care of their parents, when they suffer that profound emotional neglect, their true self goes into hiding. The true self is spontaneous, it's messy, it throws tantrums, it plays.
But in a parentified home, the true self is a liability.
Right, it's not safe to be messy when you have to hold up the sky.
So to survive, the child constructs a false self. This false self is highly adaptive. It shapes itself entirely around the parent's ego ideals and needs.
If the parent needs a quiet, perfect, adult-like child, the false self becomes exactly that.
It is a brilliant defense mechanism. The false self is the Atlas personality. It is the highly competent, room-reading, crisis-managing exterior, but its entire purpose is to protect the deeply vulnerable, exhausted true self that is locked away in the dark underneath.
And the tragedy is that the parents often praise the false self. They say things like, "Oh, you are so mature. You are my little rock. I don't know what I would do without you."
They validate the defense mechanism.
Exactly. Which just further buries the true self. And Anna Freud talked about this, right? The broken home theory. This happens a lot when there's a vacuum in the home. Maybe there is a missing parent or severe depression or addiction.
The child senses that terrifying vacuum, and they expand to fill the empty space left by the adults. They become whatever the empty space requires.
And this isn't just a behavioral shift. This is where we have to look at what is happening on a neurological and cognitive level. We aren't just talking about habits. We are talking about how this experience fundamentally wires your intrapersonal communication.
Yes, intrapersonal communication, which is the scientific term for self-talk.
The voice inside your head.
Right. For a long time, psychologists thought self-talk was just an isolated cognitive process. You're born, you learn language, and you start thinking to yourself.
But modern research, like Vygotsky's work, has completely dismantled that idea. Your inner voice isn't just something you invented on your own.
No, it is a socially constructed dialogue. It is an internalized speech pattern. We acquire our inner voice through early social interactions, primarily with our primary caregivers.
It's like downloading an operating system. You didn't write the code for your inner critic. You inherited it from the family network you were plugged into.
That is precisely how it works. Sociologists like Charles Horton Cooley talk about the looking glass self.
The looking glass self. I love that term.
It means we form our self-concept based on our perceptions of how others view us. We look into the faces of our parents, interpret their reactions, and build our identity from those reflections.
So if a parent constantly requires you to be the responsible one,
Your looking glass self reflects back an image of pure utility. You learn that you are a tool to fix problems, and as you learn to speak to yourself, you listen to how your caregivers speak about themselves and about you.
okay, so if a mother models hypervigilance, if she is constantly anxious, always anticipating disaster, or ruthlessly critical of her own performance, the child downloads that exact cognitive framework.
Yes. The child's internal dialogue becomes entirely centered on emotional management.
They learn to internally whisper, read the room, fix the problem, be perfectly quiet, don't be a burden.
The tone, the pacing, the implicit anxiety of the parent literally becomes the child's internal reality.
And this explains why the parentified child grows into an adult who is so ruthlessly, aggressively self-critical when they make a minor mistake.
Because when they fail to meet an expectation, they aren't just failing a task. They were violating the foundational code of their inherited operating system.
Their interpersonal communication sounds a massive alarm when they aren't actively managing their environment.
Because failing to manage the environment used to mean danger.
So how does this inherited operating system actually function in the real world? When the child grows up, leaves the house, and tries to build a life, how do these deeply ingrained patterns manifest?
It touches everything.
Let's bring this down to the ground. How does the Atlas personality navigate friendships, romance, and the workplace?
To understand that, we can look at some incredible qualitative research. There is a study from the IGP focusing on adults in Bangalore who grew up as elder siblings and scored extremely high on clinical scales for parentification.
The Mika scale, right?
Yeah.
Greater than 85.
Yes. The researchers sat down with them, listened to their lived experiences, and identified 4 core themes that completely dominate the adult life of a parentified child. Let's start with the first theme, relationship patterns.
This one is painful to read because for these adults, friendships almost always become conditional. They become transactional.
They have a remarkably hard time believing that someone will just be there for them without requiring a service in return.
Imagine going out to dinner with a friend, and the friend unexpectedly pays the bill. For most people, the response is just gratitude. Thank you, that's so nice.
But for the parentified adult, alarm bells go off. Their brain immediately thinks, what do I owe them now? What is the hidden cost of this?
I am in debt, and debt is dangerous.
Exactly. They cannot simply receive care. They must balance the ledger.
And romantic relationships suffer immensely. The parentified adult almost inevitably steps right back into the role they know best. The overfunctioner.
They manage their partner's moods. They anticipate their partner's needs before the partner even articulates them.
They give and they give and they give until they are completely drained. One person in the study actually said, "Sometimes I feel that I have to be there for the other person more than what I can be. I feel emotionally exhausted."
Or we see the complete opposite reaction, which stems from the exact same root. Some parentified adults avoid intimacy altogether.
Because it's just too much work.
The mere thought of being vulnerable, of taking off the armor and relying on someone else is utterly terrifying to them. To them, intimacy means being consumed by someone else's needs again.
So they stay fiercely, intensely independent to protect themselves from being used.
Which perfectly sets up the second theme from the research. Responsibility versus self-neglect.
These individuals operate under such a crushing, pervasive duty mindset. They have internalized expectations that are so incredibly high, it leads to severe physical and cognitive fatigue.
Because prioritizing their own rest feels like a dereliction of duty. If they sit down to watch a movie, an inner voice screams, "You should be productive, you are wasting time, you are being selfish."
The self-neglect is profound. They'll make sure everyone around them is fed, rested, and happy while they are running on fumes.
Essentially starving their own physical and emotional needs.
Which leads to the third theme, emotional exhaustion and coping. This is where we see the heavy reliance on masking.
They suppress their true emotions to maintain the peace. They become chameleons.
Right, they figure out exactly what the room needs them to be: cheerful, stoic, empathetic, analytical, and they put on that exact mask.
But wearing a mask all day is exhausting. So when they are finally alone, they often experience intense task avoidance.
They are so severely burnt out from managing the emotional state of the world that they physically cannot bring themselves to start a simple project.
Like doing their own laundry or just opening an email. And of course, that avoidance then triggers a massive wave of guilt because their inner critic demands perfection. It is a vicious, exhausting cycle.
And that brings us to the final theme, performativeness versus performance. This is the tension between outward competence and internal chaos.
Parentified adults are absolute masters at putting on a complex external performance to hide their internal distress.
They project an image that everything is fine, even when they are actively crumbling inside.
Because they genuinely fear that showing any vulnerability will break the illusion of their competence. And remember the equation they learned in childhood. Love equals utility. Competence equals safety.
If they show that they are struggling, they believe they will lose their value and therefore lose their relationships.
This performative aspect is so prevalent, it's actually entered the cultural lexicon.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure you've heard the term eldest daughter syndrome floating around social media or pop culture.
Yes, all the time.
It sounds like a joke, but it points to a very real clinical reality. Eldest daughters, in particular, are often bombarded with the physical and emotional responsibilities of the household.
Societal gender roles play a massive part in this. Girls are typically emotionally parentified. From a very young age, they are subtly and overtly expected to nurture, to manage the emotional temperature of the household, and to mediate conflicts.
They are conditioned to value interpersonal harmony way above their own comfort.
Psychologists point out a very specific habit they develop: constant mood monitoring. They're always checking body language, anticipating needs to get ahead of conflict.
There is a phrase for this that Regina Ha used that I found absolutely chilling. Empathy's evil twin.
Empathy's evil twin.
It looks exactly like empathy, but it has a completely different motivation.
That is such a vital distinction. True empathy is holding space for someone. It is feeling with them without trying to fix them.
Right.
Empathy's evil twin is managing someone's emotions so that you can feel safe. It is hypervigilance disguised as compassion.
You aren't tuning into your partner's bad mood because you want to comfort them. You are tuning into it so you can neutralize it before it turns into an argument.
It is a defense mechanism born entirely of anxiety.
It's important to note that boys aren't immune to parentification, though it often takes a different shape. The research shows that boys are more frequently instrumentally parentified.
Yes. They are expected to take on the role of the man of the house if the father is absent.
They are pushed to provide financial support, physical protection, and above all, to maintain absolute stoicism.
And the damage there is just as profound. They are pressured to completely repress their vulnerability. They learn that their worth is tied to their ability to provide and endure pain without complaining.
Which leads to severe emotional detachment, making it incredibly difficult for them to form emotionally intimate relationships later in life.
We see these manifestations everywhere. Chronic perfectionism, enmeshment, where you literally don't know where your identity ends and your partner's begins. Extreme cases even lead to eating disorders or substance abuse to numb the pain.
We even see it pop up in the biographies of some of the most famous thinkers in history. Carl Jung, one of the founding fathers of modern psychology.
Yes. Jung's childhood is a perfect example.
He wrote in his autobiography that his mother always spoke to him as an adult. She confided in him all the dark, adult fears and marital resentments she couldn't share with his father.
It is a textbook case of spoification. Jung's biographers noted that he had to activate the pattern of the old man within himself while he was still just a little boy, entirely as a consequence of his parents failing each other.
He became a brilliant psychologist, arguably because he was forced to analyze adult psychology before he hit puberty.
And we see it in the workplace, too. This is where the paradox is the most visible. Parentified adults often excel professionally. They're incredible crisis managers.
If a project is falling apart, they step in and fix it effortlessly.
They can anticipate a client's needs before the client even speaks. They lead teams effectively because they are intimately used to carrying the mental load of a group.
But underneath that stellar performance review, what is actually happening? They are secretly suffering from severe burnout. They experience crushing imposter phenomenon.
They feel like a fraud because they know deep down that their competence isn't just driven by ambition or passion.
It is driven by an ancient, terrifying anxiety. They work hard not to succeed, but to avoid being obsolete.
There are more people thinking about this than you might expect.
The modern workplace relies heavily, almost entirely, in some sectors, on the uncompensated emotional labor of parentified adults. Companies run on the backs of people who don't know how to say no, but they rarely recognize the psychological cost at which that labor is provided.
It's a system built on their trauma.
Okay, if you are listening to this right now and feeling a heavy sense of recognition, if your chest is tight, because this sounds exactly like your life, your childhood, your inner voice, this is the moment we pivot.
Yes, this is where we reframe.
Because for so long, this pattern feels like a personal failure. You think you are just uniquely anxious. You think you are just broken, incapable of relaxing, incapable of just chilling out like everyone else seems to be able to do.
But we need to look at the reframe offered by the clinical research. We have to completely remove the shame.
Because this is not a weakness. It is not a failure. It is a highly effective, incredibly resilient human pattern of survival.
Absolutely. The clinical literature makes a very clear, very important distinction between destructive and constructive parentification.
Constructive parentification. That sounds like an oxymoron based on what we just talked about.
I know, but it's real. Destructive parentification is what we've been talking about, the long-term harm, the burnout, the anxiety. But there is a substantial, growing body of evidence showing that these exact same experiences can forge incredible strengths.
Let's talk about the resilience studies, specifically the IJRR study. Researchers have actively tracked adults who experienced high levels of childhood parentification to see how they function.
And the findings are completely counterintuitive to the idea that trauma only breaks you.
They found a statistically significant, incredibly strong, positive correlation between childhood parentification and adult resilience. Let me say that again. As the level of parentification increased, the level of adult resilience increased right alongside it.
The p-value was 0.003, which is highly significant. It completely challenges the assumption that early hardship only produces deficits.
Think about the skill set a parentified child is forced to develop. Early problem solving, advanced emotional self-regulation, immense autonomy, a highly attuned, razor-sharp emotional intelligence.
When these individuals reach adulthood, these are no longer just desperate coping mechanisms. They become massive, tangible assets in their lives.
Theorists have a beautiful term for this. They call it survivor competence.
Survivor competence. Exactly.
This is the aha moment. Your hypervigilance, your ability to read a room the second you walk in, your relentless competence, the way you can manage a crisis without breaking a sweat, they aren't signs that you are broken.
They are proof of your profound adaptability.
You built a lifeboat when the ship was sinking. You did exactly what you had to do to survive a chaotic environment, and you did it brilliantly.
Yeah.
You survived.
Precisely. We must view parentification through a non-pathologizing, strength-based lens. It was a survival strategy that worked. It kept you safe. It kept your family functioning.
The goal in adulthood is not to feel ashamed of the strategy.
The goal isn't to look back and hate the lifeboat you built. The goal is to recognize that you are safely on shore now. The crisis has passed. You no longer need to carry a heavy wooden lifeboat on your back everywhere you go.
The research backs up the idea that putting down the lifeboat is entirely possible. There's a concept in attachment theory called earned security.
It's one of the most hopeful concepts in psychology.
The idea is that even if you had a deeply insecure, parentified, chaotic attachment in childhood, you are not doomed to repeat it forever.
Through self-awareness, through conscious effort, and by building healthy relationships with people who don't demand utility from you, it is entirely possible to attain a secure attachment style later in life.
You can earn your security. Your brain can rewire itself for safety.
Which brings us to the actual process of doing that work. How do we put down the lifeboat? If we connect this to the bigger picture, to love, to identity, to the profound process of rewriting our internal scripts, we find incredibly hopeful answers.
Let's look back at the research on interpersonal communication, the downloaded operating system of self-talk we discussed earlier.
Right, the mother-daughter communication study.
The most crucial finding in that research wasn't just that your negative self-talk is inherited. The most important finding was that self-talk is not fixed.
That is the turning point. The code can be rewritten. The daughters in those communication studies didn't just passively accept the critical, anxious inner voices they inherited from their overwhelmed mothers.
Once they became aware of the pattern, they actively engaged in rewriting the script. They reframed those negative maternal influences.
They used external validation from healthy friendships to counteract the inner critic. They practiced conscious resistance.
They engaged in the hard, unglamorous work of boundary setting.
They use therapies like narrative therapy, which helps you literally reauthor the story of your life, or attachment-focused therapy to separate the voice of their parent from their own true voice.
It is the process of learning to separate Winnicott's false self, the highly competent performing mask, from the true self underneath.
The parentified adult has to learn a terrifying, liberating truth. Love does not have to equal utility. You do not have to be useful to be worthy of belonging.
In childhood, belonging meant surviving. And if being the caregiver was the only way to belong in your family, of course, you held onto that role with a white-knuckle grip. Who wouldn't?
But you are an adult now. You can belong simply because you exist. This leads to a massive intergenerational shift.
Breaking this cycle for the next generation.
Yes. When parentified children recognize these patterns, they can act as circuit breakers. By engaging in open dialogue, by practicing actual vulnerability instead of performative competence, they reject those inauthentic emotional performances.
They decide consciously not to pass the weight of the sky onto the next generation.
But doing that raises a really profound, almost scary question for the individual.
Yeah. If you spend your whole life being The fixer, the rock, the responsible one. What happens to your identity when you stop fixing everyone else? Who are you when you aren't being useful?
That is the ultimate question of this journey. When you strip away the crisis management, the hypervigilance, the compulsive caregiving, the frantic need to make sure everyone else is okay, what is left?
At first, it can feel terribly empty. You might feel like you have no identity at all.
But that emptiness is actually just space.
Yes.
It is the beautiful, terrifying space of finally discovering your true self, perhaps for the very first time. It is the space where you get to figure out what you want, not just what the room needs from you.
We have covered a vast landscape today. From the heavy shoulders of the Atlas personality, standing under the crushing weight of the sky, to the deep, invisible roots of family systems theory.
We've explored how a child's brain brilliantly adapts to chaos.
And finally, we look at the quiet, powerful act of rewriting your own internal script. We've seen how the lifeboat of parentification, while absolutely necessary for survival in the storm, doesn't have to define your life once you reach the shore.
It's a journey from survival to actual living.
If this conversation felt true for you, you're always welcome here. You can subscribe to Leone Patterns and continue with us.
As you step away from this deep dive, consider this one quiet thought. Putting down the weight of the world doesn't mean you have stopped caring about others. It simply means that after all this time, you finally have a hand free to hold your own.
Same pace, same questions. See you then.